Stephen Robb here, tillage and renewables reporter with the Irish Farmers Journal. So today we're going to have an exciting panel discussion on the role of liquefied petroleum gas, LPG, and indeed BioLPG in meeting Ireland's climate and clean air targets. So today I'm joined by a great panel of guests to discuss this with me, who I'll introduce to you in just one second. But first, I think it's worth touching on the current lay of the land and setting the scene for the discussion just a little bit. So over the past decade, I mean, there really has been a step change in the public's awareness and desire to decarbonise our energy usage. While we've seen false dawns along these lines before, I think we'll all agree that this time it's here to stay. Most recently, for example, our newly formed coalition government have committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 7% per annum. And this is very much on the road to net zero by 2050. This didn't come from anywhere. This is all underpinned by previous legislation and agreements and commitments, including the Paris Agreement, our Climate Action Plan, our EU Green Deal, and of course our 2020 targets. Maybe it's worth just touching on the individual sectors to maybe elaborate on this panel discussion a little bit further. So electricity, for example, Ireland, we're pretty confident that we will be able to decarbonise our electricity sector through capitalising off our natural resources such as wind and possibly solar. But then you get into transport and then you get into heat, and those are the real interesting sectors because the challenge to decarbonise these sectors is great. Just focusing on the heat for a second, I mean, there have been great efforts made to decarbonise our heat sector, and we might see these come to fruition over the coming decade. But these have almost entirely been confined to communities, to businesses, to farms connected to the national gas grid. And this poses a distinct challenge for the 75% of rural communities which are not connected to the national gas grid, and many of which are still using oil and solid fuels. Furthermore, many rural buildings are constructed or were constructed pre-1980s, which means that in general they have a lower BER, and in fact making them energy efficient in terms of heating is quite difficult. So the question really is, how does LPG and BioLPG help off-grid heat users and indeed the transport sector transition to a low-carbon energy system and achieve cleaner air? Well, here to discuss this with me is Seamus Boland, CEO of Irish Rural Link. We also have Kenny Deary, CEO of Galway Chamber of Commerce, and indeed Brian Durham, chair of the newly rebranded Liquid Gas Ireland. Brian, I'm going to kick off with yourself here. You're going to discuss LPG, the role of LPG and BioLPG, and indeed some of the main elements in your new Vision 2040 document.
Okay, great. Stephen, thank you very much. Hello and welcome. I'm delighted to launch Vision 2040 on behalf of Liquid Gas Ireland. This vision sets out how our industry can contribute to Ireland's Green New Deal, including the ambitious goal to reach zero emissions by 2050. The vision also ties in with the government's clean air strategy. LPG has been part of Ireland's energy mix for almost a century. Going forward, we believe that LPG and BioLPG can support the Irish government's commitment to transition to a low carbon economy. This fuel can also help Ireland's binding obligations under the 2015 Paris Agreement on climate change. Gas networks extend to a relatively low 39% of households in Ireland. The full potential of lower carbon gaseous fuels like LPG and BioLPG need to be further exploited. The biggest environmental gain from the use of this clean fuel is when it replaces coal, peat, and heating oil. Over 40% of households in Ireland rely on oil to heat their homes, and 65% of homes in rural Ireland use oil for central heating. LPG already offers significant reductions in carbon and air pollutants. BioLPG is the future for our sector and provides up to 90% certified greenhouse gas emission savings compared to LPG. Already available on the market today, BioLPG is a drop-in fuel. It allows off-grid homes, businesses, and industry to reduce their carbon footprint without the need for deep retrofitting. Indeed, the majority of homes in Ireland were built before 1983, almost 70% of them, and most of these use oil. In rural Ireland, the homes are typically larger, with 83% of the population in detached homes that have a high energy demand. And indeed, half of these homes have a BER rating of C or below. They would require substantial investment to accommodate a heat pump solution. It's for this reason that it's widely recognised that a high proportion of rural homes are not considered suitable for heat pumps. The truth is that the leap from old technology to new would leave many behind. And in a just society, we should not leave anyone behind. It's better to upgrade the technology in situ with modern, high-efficiency condensing gas boilers. And the least cost, best fit, drop-in fuel is LPG and BioLPG. Now, time is of the essence. No one solution can possibly predominate given the variety, age, and spread of Ireland's housing stock. Liquid Gas Ireland estimates that if 500,000 homes switch from using oil-fired central heating to BioLPG by 2040, it could save 1.9 million tonnes of CO2 emissions every year. Liquid Gas Ireland members are committed to working with Ireland's policymakers to develop a supportive framework to achieve the net zero emissions. In the immediate future, decarbonising heat will be necessary if Ireland is to meet its climate change targets. Rural Ireland and rural energy consumers can play a proactive role in the energy transition. In this document, we outline 3 key actions that we believe the government must take. A, legislate for a mixed technology approach to decarbonisation to use the full suite of technologies available. B, commit to clean alternatives to improve regional air quality. Banning smoky fuels or coals is not enough. We need to go further. And C, prioritise a just transition. Support rural Ireland on this journey. Their choices are limited by virtue of their location. Our society demands an energy transition that is fair, affordable, and convenient. Liquid Gas Ireland's member companies have the experience and the expertise to deliver. We look forward to engaging with government and energy sector stakeholders in the weeks and months to come. Thank you.
Excellent, Brian. Thank you for that. So I suppose to kick off the panel discussion as such, I'm going to stick with yourself on this, Brian. LPG, it's not new. It's been around for a while. Give me the current lay of the land here. How many customers are using LPG as a poise for growth? And why now? Why now are you bringing out your Vision 2040 document?
Yeah, well, you're correct, absolutely correct. It has been around for an awful long time. It's been here, as I say, for almost a century. And it was in Ireland before electrification and before the gas networks were there. So it brought energy right the way around Ireland all those years ago and continues to do so. Providing, first of all, for cooking and then for heating. And also it's now involved in industrial process and in hospitality sector in a huge way with hotels and restaurants. Why are we doing this now? I mean, we are very conscious of the fact that decarbonisation has to happen as well. We have to play our part in it also. And once this LPG, BioLPG became available, we were thrilled to be able to promote it. As an industry, we've been doing so now for the last couple of years, and it's got fantastic traction throughout Ireland. It's in the early stages of maturity, there's no doubt about that. But because BioLPG is chemically identical to LPG, it is literally a drop-in fuel. There's no changes in the way we store it or distribute it, and it's just mixed with the ordinary LPG and distributed in that way. But it's totally accountable for in a mass balance system. So yes, it is easily dropped into the existing framework. There's no need to change any appliances. It's identically, as I say, identically the same as conventional LPG. The number of customers requiring it and using it have been growing in recent years. It is being used, as I say, for households as well as industry and in the commercial sphere. I suppose people in Ireland are becoming much more aware of their environment. And if they can make a switch to a greener way of doing things, they will. There's no doubt about that. But it has to be affordable and it has to be justified. So, as I say, BioLPG is the next iteration in our industry. It is the area of, that's going to grow in our sector over the next 20 years. We are in the early years of it, but we know already that it has got some traction and will continue to grow. We're very
just on the BioLPG. So for anyone who's watching who's not familiar with it, it's been on the market since 2018 and it reduces carbon emissions by 90% compared to conventional LPG.
Yes, this has got to do with the feedstocks or the way it's actually produced. We're all familiar with biodiesel in the sense that it's now a proportion of the diesel that's sold to the trucks and the cars in the country. I think it's up to 11% is bio, coming from a renewable source. So in the production of biodiesel, a byproduct of the biodiesel is biopropane or BioLPG. So for every 100 units of biodiesel produced, you get 5 to 8 units of biopropane produced. So it's a byproduct of the production of biodiesel. And therefore, that's where it comes from. And I say these feed sources are vegetable oils, tallow, used cooking oils. They're all waste and organic waste and residues. That's where it comes from.
And where is it being manufactured at the moment?
Well, the member that actually started bringing it into the country first and still does is sourcing it from Neste in Rotterdam. It's a the Neste would be the large producers of biodiesel on the planet, in the sense they have 3 very large refining facilities, and it's in Rotterdam that it's sourced at the moment.
Okay, so we're just going to touch on that a little bit later on again, and where it's going in terms of possibly indigenous production. But first, I want to pull in Seamus on this. Seamus, you're on the ground. You're CEO of Irish Rural Link, and you have a real good handle on the rural situation at the moment. I mean, from your customers, or rather from the personnel businesses you'd be dealing with, I mean, what are the real barriers, or what are the real problems or concerns for rural customers in terms of getting access to affordable, reliable heat and fuel options to begin with, and then in time, I suppose, more sustainable, possibly even renewable heating options?
Yeah, the obstacles, I suppose, come in 2 forms. Unfortunately, as Brian said earlier on, many of the houses, especially domestic heating, and is what we're talking about here, were built prior 80s, 83. That means they're either set up to burn fossil fuel, turf, peat, or they're using oil, or a combination of both. And unfortunately, both of those are the complete wrong fuel, if that's what you want. And that means that they are contributing seriously in the wrong direction in terms of carbon emissions. To change that, and there's the real problem, is extremely costly. There is no easy way to do it, whether you try and retrofit, whether you try and do a mixture of wood pellets or heat pump, and Brian suggested, and is correct, many households are simply not suitable for that kind of change. So we held a number of very public meetings in conjunction with SEA Ireland a couple of years ago, where people were looking at what changes they could make. Those meetings were attended in very large numbers, 200 to 300 people turning up. I remember in the Hudson Bay Hotel. These were people absolutely almost panicking because they know they're burning the wrong type of fuel. They know carbon tax is coming in, and they know they have to make a change. But they also know that the change that's been touted at the moment, now that isn't about gas because they don't think of gas as an alternative, but certainly in retrofit or other forms of change, you're talking about €80,000 per household. Now, that represents a massive challenge. So I'll give you why, another reason, Stephen, why people get very angry in rural Ireland when they hear things like carbon tax. Unfortunately, they have no choice but to pay it. And if it doubled or trebled or quadrupled in the next budget, rural households, many low-income households especially, end up having to pay it. And the fact is that we do have people who live in houses that are cold in the winter, and indeed there are recorded, according to the CSO, some deaths due to cold, dying of the cold. We really do have a serious problem in bringing rural households into compliance with the energy requirements now accepted by everybody under climate change.
I mean, as the old saying goes, it's hard to be green when you're in the red. I mean, that's out and out fuel poverty. I mean, for any, say, any political member who's watching this, what's the feeling in rural Ireland? I mean, is the feeling that the government are disconnected in terms of energy policy with what's actually happening on the ground?
Yeah, there's a huge feeling of disconnectedness, and it's not just with the government, it's with environmentalists, it's with a whole range of people who are effectively saying to us what we need to do. Now, it's like, you know, if you're standing on the edge of a stream and you need to jump the other side, but you've no legs, you really can't do it. And it doesn't matter how many people tell you you must jump it to save your life, you still can't do it. So I think the frustration and indeed anger out there is quite palpable, because the fact of the matter is a lot of households are ordinary, not low income in some cases, yes, they are low income, but middle income households, you know, trying to bring up a family. A sudden bill of 15, 20 grand sends them into all sorts of spaces where they shouldn't be. They're trying to borrow, etc. So they're not able for the kind of shock necessary to convert their households. And I think there's a feeling among rural households that, look, guys, we know we have to change. You're saying it often enough, but when are you going to understand we cannot change? We do not have 80,000 or 40,000 or even 20,000 euro to make that change. So, you know, can you start thinking of ways to help us change?
Just, Brian, I want to clarify one point. Where does BioLPG stand in terms of the carbon tax?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about that is that it doesn't have any carbon tax. It's already been recognised within the EU as a biofuel, and Ireland have endorsed that as well. So there's no carbon tax applicable to BioLPG, which is great. And if you think about it, as Seamus rightly says, there are indications that carbon tax are going to increase over the next 10 years. At present, it's €26 per tonne of CO2 emitted. And they're talking about it going to €80 per tonne of CO2 emitted. Now, you know, if you don't have choices, and this is, you have to pay a carbon tax, that is a huge penalty. That is a massive penalty. And you must give people choices. It's not enough just to say we're going to save the world by putting carbon tax on everybody. You must give people choices to be able to decarbonize. And it is a transition. We appreciate that. And as renewables come on, including BioLPG, we need to be able to give people the choice to purchase that. And that's why it's important. Anyway, to answer your question very briefly, there is no carbon tax attached to it.
Okay. Now, Kenny, I want to bring you in on this. Kenny Deering, CEO of Galway Chamber of Commerce. Kenny, you're on the ground. You're on the ground with businesses, with companies, rural and urban, I'm assuming. Tell me, what's the sense on the ground in terms of companies' attitudes and commitments to sustainability, to the various obligations and costs that are coming down the line?
Thank you, Stephen, for the question. And indeed, first of all, just to say that as a business community, we welcome this Vision 2040 document and this initiative. And I think as many tools in the toolbox will be needed to try and help us all achieve the ambitions set out in terms of emissions targets as we move forward. I think Seamus put it very eloquently in terms of the analogy of the stream and looking to the other side. And I think one of the bits that many, irrespective of how well developed the businesses seem to be or how perceived to be underdeveloped the business is in their attitude towards the green agenda, what we all need is a very clear roadmap in terms of what good looks like and how do we know when we're doing good. And one of the bits, particularly in the last couple of years, there's been so much focus on I suppose the green agenda from the Commission President and Ursula von der Leyen's initiatives at the European level, setting targets that are very ambitious. Some in the business community have huge concerns that they're too ambitious, but yet if we temper them, then you reduce your own level of, I suppose, immediacy in terms of trying to drive change. So what many in the business community are looking for is to be educated in terms of what physical steps they can take in terms of what good will look like. Many businesses want to be associated with being more sustainable. They want to be able to share with their staff that, listen, we are making huge efforts in terms of trying to be a more environmentally friendly business. We appreciate the long-term impacts that will have, but they want to be able to say, right, if I'm a large corporate, there's a good chance you're the CSR officer and you've got a lot of insight in this space. So they're well ahead of the game. But if I'm an SME and I'm employing 10, 15, 20 people, then what does good look like for me? I don't have the ability to employ a CSR officer. What should I do? What are the small steps that will make a difference? And how can I fund those? And Seamus is a very valid point in terms of, the investment can be considerable for some businesses, particularly depending on their unique circumstance. What type building are they operating from? What is the energy rating at the moment? What is the baseline? Remember, many of these businesses are fighting through and trying to be resilient through what is COVID, and we're preparing for what was going to be Brexit. And earlier this year, we were focusing on cash flow planning and supply chain for those businesses around Brexit. Then this massive pandemic kicks in and businesses are on a wobble. So we need to be very careful to make sure that with all that's happening in survival, the whole CSR and Green Deal agenda isn't set back 3-4 years by virtue of businesses trying to stay afloat, which, to be fair, is a very reasonable position for them to say, listen, I'm trying to keep the wolf in the door, keep salaries funded. The last thing I need at the moment is looking at an investment in something to make the energy efficiency of my building better. So actually, as government, and as lobbyists and as stakeholders, we have a huge responsibility to say, yes, everything else is important, but equally lobby the government to try and get the supports that are needed to help educate people. And also with the investments, Stephen, we know with many of these investments, the ROI is very clear. And actually, from a financial point of view, the kickback comes readily enough as well. So I think we just as a collective and as an industry, and as I say, we as a business community welcome this vision and this session, this ability to talk about this today in a COVID and Brexit environment. And I think we just need to stay very close to the businesses and to the communities, create understanding as to what good will look like and show them a roadmap as to how to be good.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very valid point. I mean, you take some of the larger ETS companies, I mean, they have entire teams in this area, so they do. Whereas for an SME, you might have a relatively small team. Chances are you're not going to be able to devote your time entirely to this. So, I mean, there is probably a knowledge gap there as such, which is part of the reason why we're doing this. To get the information out there. I just want to touch on some of the individual say. Sorry, go ahead, Brian.
Just to come on with what Kenny had just said. What does good look like? I agree with everything he's just said in relation to the education part and the support part in relation to small businesses. And, in the west of Ireland and off the natural gas link, we have so many customers in the tourism area, the hotels and restaurants. And I have to say, just a shout out to them at the start here, some of the early adopters for BioLPG were in that sector, because they recognized straight away that they're providing a product which incorporates not just people to stay overnight, but of food as well. And they wanted to be able to have sustainability throughout their business model. So they went for the sustainable food and sustainable fuel, and they were able to use that to promote their businesses. And as Kenny has rightly said, these businesses are under huge pressure now. And this is not just like for a few months, they're going to be under pressure for a number of years. Yet at the same token, they have to be able to, if we want to hit our targets of 7% a year, we need to be able to bring more and more people with us on this journey. And therefore, it needs government support and assistance in that area. So just to reinforce what Kenny has said, thank you.
So, I mean, just to pull on that hop and ball, as I say, in terms of government support, so I suppose in some of the previous schemes and current schemes that are open there now, we have the likes of retrofitting, we have grants out there for heat pumps and so on and so forth. I mean, is there a grant available for maybe boilers for LPG or high efficiency boilers? I mean, are they available, or do we need something larger maybe for?
That's where we're missed. There's a gap here in the whole thing. You know, the National Energy Climate Plan that's the government put together, you know, we're not 100% happy with that. They need to broaden their perspective in relation to how they encompass all the different technologies. Yes, heat pumps have a role. There's no doubt about that. We're not disputing it. But there's hybridization with heat pumps. There's biofuels. I mean, a shout out to you mentioned yourself, Stephen, the Renewable Gas Forum Ireland, who are pushing for anaerobic digesters to produce biomethane. I mean, we have a whole spectrum of different technologies that we need to incorporate. And if we're just going to go with one fit for everything, one solution, we're not going to hit our targets. And they need to be started now. We can't wait till 2028 to do this. We need to start it now. And we need to incorporate all of the different alternatives in the actual plan. So the answer is, we're not exactly happy with the way it's just laid out at the moment. Yes, and there's more that can be done. And we're willing to work with policymakers to assist them in framing it.
Yeah, okay. Ken, I just back to yourself, and I just want to touch briefly on air quality. I mean, at local industry level, even on the Chamber of Commerce, I mean, are air quality and emissions targets, are they factoring into any companies' decisions in terms of how they move forward?
Again, I think in answering this question, the size of the company and their backdrop and their history is a huge influencer in this. So if we look at some of the larger FDI investments, so there's 72 IDA companies in Galway as an example, and many of those employ hundreds if not thousands of people. Many of those have a parent operation elsewhere, have a stock exchange listing, and have signed up to commitments around this. And as you say, have whole teams in place. They're fixated with this. When you walk into their premises, you know, there's a wall, and it's their sustainability wall where they've iterated what it is they've done. And I suppose they've set out that roadmap in terms of where they came from as a company and how they've transitioned. And I think that's been hugely significant. Even within one employer here in Galway, who has about 4,000 staff, they moved from non-paper, non-plastic to recyclable cups in their canteen and their restaurant, and they were able to give very visual examples, equally in terms of their emissions and how that influences the air quality they have. But on a wider level, the honest answer to that question, if I was to go into many of our mid-sized industry and what's their focus on air quality at the moment, they may tentatively have a vision and say, listen, we're committed to it. But in terms of actually being able to measure and to say we have done X, Y, and Z this year, it's not just there yet. And I think that's where the whole education piece in this whole space is becoming so much more important. People all now associate with, you know, the recyclable materials, you know, and on their websites they'll be able to iterate something visually. But in terms of the understanding and the investment that's needed to go further and measure, for example, air quality, if you're an employer employing 20, 30 people, it's not there on any consistent level. Just to mention, Stephen, one thing that we're quite fixated on, and it's a Chambers Ireland initiative, of which there's 44 chambers in the network. So we're ensconced in many of these communities and regional communities, and it's about the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is something that we've really only got our teeth into properly last year as an organisation. And we're working with the likes of the UN and Concern, and indeed even we here in Galway held roundtable discussions in February and March with industry. And we literally were whiteboarding these specific conversations. You know, what does good look like? And if you look under the goals, you know, there's one under climate action specifically that we have adopted as a business community. And I think if you asked me that question in 2 years' time, hopefully, touch wood, you'll be able to roll off a whole load of examples where we met with companies who are at this level, and as a result of showing a roadmap and creating understanding, they've come to that level. But we're really only at the early stages of it.
Okay, guys, I'm going to throw a question out to the panel. I mean, what's the driver behind this? Is it a card or is it a stick? Is it the fact that companies have to meet, I suppose, depending on your size and whether ETS or non-ETS, so on and so forth, whether or not they have to meet certain targets, or for the smaller SMEs or for the homeowners, is it cost, and is it purely down to cost? And at some point in the future, if the cost of say fossil fuels were significantly high because of carbon tax, so on and so forth, and a renewable cheaper, and that's what it is, fuel equivalent was on the market, I mean, would you see a mass switch, or, you know, have I got this completely wrong here? What is the driver behind it?
Sorry,
yeah, well, I think definitely cost in terms of the homes, as I said. Many of them are you know, built before the 1980s, so therefore the cost, the biggest problem is not the ongoing cost, it's the actual transitioning cost. And you know, we would have proposed that, you know, we don't expect government to be able to fund that kind of figure all by itself. I mean, that would be really dreaming very, very high and probably wild. But, you know, there could have been, they could look at a way of funding this, a mixture of proper loan facilities, either through the credit union movement or low interest that would be backed by government. And you mentioned sustainable goals. I mean, the first one of the 17 is the eradication of poverty. So the last thing I think we all agree on is we want to see something causing poverty. So I think there could be an innovative way of resolving the cost, but again, if the you know, the launch of, you know, biogas was available in a range of ways, that certainly would maybe take that out of it. As I said, you know, the cost is there, and any carbon tax doesn't change that. So that's where I would see it.
On that, Stephen, I think what's going to drive real change is leadership, meaningful leadership. And I mean this from the government level and right through industry. If we look at Ireland's achievements in the last few years under this area, we're not award-winning. We have breached, I suppose, the commitments that we had made, our coattails of underused allowances maybe earlier in the noughties, so the fines haven't come through as significantly as they will over the next few years if we continue to drive a bus through the deadlines we're setting ourselves. And I think businesses look on and see that and say, listen, we're all right yet. So I do think a realization from government down that this really is serious. And the stick will come because there will be fines, there will be carbon taxes. So in the meantime, it's trying to show real leadership, create knowledge and understanding, so that you're not continually pushing a rock up the hill, because we don't still want to be talking in 2035 for those of us who will be around, touch wood, you know, oh well, we're still reaching our targets. This needs to be done from leadership now.
Yeah, Stephen, just to add to the two gentlemen, I understand the stick and carrot way of doing things, and certainly the carbon tax is very much the stick, which is not going to go away because it's going to be a European-wide way of doing things. There's so many ways to do it, with loans and subsidies and income tax rebates to encourage people. Just remember, rural Ireland don't have the same choices as the cities, so we have to be they have to be recognised in that way as a special case, and we need to ensure that not left behind. It has to be a just transition. So every single financial tool that is available to us should be used. And there's no doubt, interest rates being as low as they are now, they've never been lower and will be low for quite a while. There has to be a way to do this, which is just and fair. In terms of real leadership, you know, as an industry, we are looking to show leadership in the area of our green credentials by bringing this product online. It is in early stages of maturity, but just to show you how serious we are as an industry about this, we reckon by 2040, we will only be selling BioLPG. That's how serious we are. We're going to be pushing this very, very hard. It will be only BioLPG. So therefore, we're making serious commitments to having it available and moving it on. Now, LPG is a very important part of the mix. It is a stepping stone, and we will be doing everything in our power to ensure that, you know, it is the greenest fossil fuel outside of natural gas, and it's available all over Ireland, not just off the network. It's available all over Ireland. So that's why we're pushing this agenda. So in that sense, we're trying to show leadership in our industry.
Excellent. Okay, guys, we're coming very close to the end, but I do want to touch on the future of BioLPG. It is poised for growth, as you just said. At the moment, it's imported. What are the prospects for indigenous production? And for perhaps an area very close to my own heart, are there opportunities for rural communities, for farming enterprises to possibly get involved in the production of feedstock, or indeed the production of the fuel itself?
Yeah, as I said at the outset, at the moment, BioLPG is made as a byproduct from the processing and formation of biodiesel. And it's you're using both the HVO system, hydrotreated vegetable oils, as well as co-processing. And in the immediate few years, that is the way it's going to be. Well, our members are already investing heavily in R&D in this area, so as to find new avenues. And the new avenues that will happen over the next couple of years will be certainly in gasification and pyrolysis. So that's the advanced stage. And then after that, we will be into the biological stage, where we're going to be using bacteria to produce these gases in terms of fermentation, and even in AD, anaerobic digesters. So what has to happen now is, and we do need this support, the industry needs this support from the government in relation to R&D, research and development. And there's the Climate Action Fund, which is available to help sectors like ourselves to do this. And to get to the stage where we have an indigenous BioLPG, we need scale. We need to have a lot of customers coming on, needing it and using it, so as to justify it. And that will come, but we need the government to help the industry and the sector and indigenous companies to do the R&D and develop the business in that sense. So that would be a shout out to the government to help us in that area.
Excellent. So look, I am quite conscious of time, so we are going to wrap it up now. But before we do, I just want to get your closing remarks, everybody, in terms of, again, for the politicians who are watching this. I mean, what recommendations would you make to them in terms of supporting rural homes and communities and farms as they navigate towards our new kind of low energy transition, or green energy transition, I should say. Seamus, I'm going to start with yourself and follow on to Kenny after.
Yeah, thanks very, very much, Stephen, and it was a pleasure to be here. Look, I think we've got to devise a fairly comprehensive plan which will set targets every year in terms of the transition required. That means targets which deal with the whole area of cost, and which also deal with the types of alternative non-carbon fuels or non-carbon fuel systems that may need to be brought into place. In terms of the rural areas, there are probably economic opportunities in I suppose growing, if that's the right word, biofuel, and as well as doing the research that Brian suggested. I would argue a serious amount of research on producer models. I think, Stephen, you're very much an expert in tillage area. I used to do a bit of that myself, but I do know the tillage is high capital industry, as you know, so therefore producers together in cohesive form to ensure that, you know, that there is enough produced, that they are properly compensated, and that there's no shortages built in every so many years in the way farming can happen. So I think that would be an interesting piece of research that needs to be added to the research that Brian is suggesting. But I suppose above all, and the overarching is, if we're serious about reaching the goals set out in various agreements we've signed as a country, then we really need to put the integrated plan together, put the financial and economic plan alongside it, and make sure when we think of the 17 SDGs, that the first one, eradicating poverty, isn't by default the only one we succeed in. And I think that would be a very, reasonable way to look at it.
And Seamus, thank you. On to yourself, Kenny.
I agree with everything Seamus said. I think in the way that Liquid Gas Ireland have this Vision 2040 launched now and articulating what the future looks like for the next 20 years, we need to create understanding within communities and within clusters of businesses how they play a part in that vision, and to map out with them in a consultative way the best stakeholder engagement you can do. What is their model now? So for those who have been saving turf and doing the bog and getting coal and are still getting their deliveries of oil, what does it take for them to transition from that process now to, in 2-3 years' time, what good will look like and how they play their part in that vision? And then figuring out the financials, which are a key part of it, because as I say, there are so many competing interests for people's time and money, and during COVID, during Brexit, and every other shock that will come, is they need to understand what the spend will be like. Will the government be able to co-finance or co-invest with them? You know, will there be some participative funding? What does that look like? And equally, what the return on investment for them will be, so that you create a vision between now and 3 years or 5 years' time, the steps people need to take, the impact that will have, how they play a part in the bigger picture, and equally how they'll be better off as a result of it. And I think just keeping it very simple, because the language even of renewable energy, you know, part of it, you could read a sentence 3 times over and not fully understand what exactly that means. So I think keeping it very simple and understanding that people have many competing demands, but they need to understand this is good for them.
Thank you very much, Kenny. And Brian, over to yourself.
Yeah, I agree with both gentlemen and the way they've put the points so well. We're talking about government-led leadership in many respects, and it has to be looked at in the granular sense from the bottom up, and knowing how each of these solutions will work on the ground. So as far as as Liquid Gas Ireland are concerned, we have 3 key recommendations to governments, which I just reiterate. It's to legislate for a mixed technology approach to decarbonisation and to allow the whole spectrum of the good technology that's out there to be relevant. The second is to commit to clean alternatives in relation to regional air quality. It's very important to recognise that, you know, the EPA have said in 2015 that there are 1,100 deaths a year in relation to poor air quality on this island. And that's down to the SOXs and the NOXs and particular matter and particular particle matter, I should say. So it's important to try and screen these out. So yes, to commit to clean alternatives. It's not enough just to ban smoky coal. We just have to have much more, go much further. And the third thing is to prioritize the just transition, that it is affordable for everybody in the country, leave nobody behind. And that would be the three definite asks. Okay.
Excellent, Brian. Thank you very much. So it's come to that time that we're going to have to wrap things up. Look, I'd just like to thank all of our panelists, first of all, for their contributions. I can't say there's anything in it I disagree with. I don't think there's as much emphasis put on off-grid heat users as what there needs to be. And this is a great way to get the conversation going. And last but not least, I'd like to thank Liquid Gas Ireland as well for facilitating this conversation. I'd say it was very worthwhile. So guys, we'll finish up here.
delighted to be the first biogas LPG customer in Ireland. My choice was driven by price and the environment. And I think this is the way it's going to go, and hopefully more people catch on to it.
My name's Donald, and I'm married to Kathleen, and we've been using bottled gas for as long as I can remember, just to supplement the overall heating in the house. And of course the great thing is that it's portable. You can move it from room to room. Well, we would use bottled gas for entertaining, and in the patio we use it all the time for barbecuing. We use it with our sons all the time. We like to be outdoors. We have a lovely round table which the heater sits in the middle of, and it's just fantastic, and that uses the bottled gas. So we find it very versatile, very simple to use, and the mobile heaters are terrific.
BioLPG is very much aligned with our strategy, where we use it to create electricity basically for water, because we're producing raw milk. Sterilisation is very important of all the equipment. Boiling water and heating, we have underfloor heating, so it's for energy efficiency.
Because we wanted a system that was going to provide water on demand, I think is a big part of it. And we need to have, within reason, a limitless supply of it.
We can use it at all times of night and day for all hygiene operations, whether it's cleaning the bulk tank, cleaning the robots, or cleaning calf buckets.
BioLPG, enables us to buy a greener source of energy. It enables us to have a stronger environmental policy. It allows us to have a smaller footprint, and it really goes to the core of really what we are as Anam Coffee. Our roasters are both powered by propane, and the BioLPG really is the power behind the roasting of our coffee.
We use BioLPG here for a fleet of 14 forklifts. The forklifts themselves are used both in and out of the plant. It's a food factory, so it's important for us to have clean, renewable energy. For us, it's about reducing the overall carbon emissions by 30% and embracing renewable energy up to 100%.
LPG burns much cleaner. From an environmental point of view, it's much better. It has worked extremely well. We have had no difficulties with it since it was turned on. Very efficient in the burning process. And from the environmental end of things, it achieves one of our company goals.
Small step that makes a huge difference to the globe, to us, and to sustainability. We have 2 pools here, we have a spa, we have underfloor heating. We have 8 kitchens here, including the bakery. All these are powered by gas. The fact that we can stop using overnight conventional gas and move to biogas without him giving out in the kitchen that the flame has changed colour is a good thing.
I've always used LPG gas at home and in my professional kitchen. It's so clean, versatile and easy to control. A few years ago we decided to buy the building next door just behind me here in the kitchen, and we moved from heating oil to LPG gas. Now LPG provides all the energy we need, from cooking to heating and also our hot water. Since we switched, we've saved on our energy costs significantly. We are so delighted we made the switch.